So, as I'm recording this, the NBA season starts in the next 10 days, and I felt like this is the perfect time to really wrap up everything that we've learned in the offseason. And as I wrap up the more important things that we've learned, this also allows us to set expectations for some of these teams, the conferences, and players in this upcoming season. Now, if you enjoyed this type of content, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section below so we can continue this conversation. Also hit the thumbs up, but most importantly, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be updated when I drop these videos. So first, let's talk about the Houston Rockets, and I honestly believe this has been the biggest story all throughout the shortened offseason. After having one of the more successful runs in the past decade, the Houston Rockets are finally moving in a different direction, and it isn't just with their personnel. In the beginning of the offseason, General Manager Daryl Morey, after nearly 15 years with the organization, decided to part ways. Around that same time, head coach Mike D'Antoni also departed from the franchise, and following those decisions, both James Harden and Russell Westbrook decided to request a trade, which could be problematic for the Houston Rockets because as they reside in the Western Conference, that means that it's much more difficult to make the playoffs, and this is an organization that just the year prior gave up some draft assets to receive Russell Westbrook. Eventually, the front office in Houston finally found a situation for Westbrook and traded him to the Washington Wizards, and in return received John Wall in a draft pick, as well as making some other decisions throughout the offseason that could potentially bring some optimism to a franchise that is looking to rebuild in the near future. But we're only at the surface of the major problem here, because after a very successful run, James Harden has not only found himself demanding a trade, but also highly upset with the front office, despite the fact that throughout his tenure in Houston, he has okayed and approved several transactions and roster changes to this organization. And here we are now, and the Rockets still have not traded him. Now, that is not to say that there aren't any suitors out there for James Harden. There are several teams that are willing to give up anything to bring on a player of Harden's caliber. The only problem is that the Houston Rockets want to make sure that they get something of value in return. Now, allegedly, the Houston Rockets are targeting the Philadelphia 76ers in hopes that in return they will receive either Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons, so the transition from being a title contending team to a rebuilding one will be as smooth as possible. But regardless of what Houston will receive for Harden, because we're talking about a team that is out west and more than likely at best, we're talking about an organization that will be revamping, not potentially doing a complete rebuild. More than likely, the Rockets will be a worse team than they have been in the prior years, which is a shame because we are talking about an organization that has been really consistent when it comes to just making the playoffs and being a title contender over the past 3 to 4 years. Speaking of the Sixers, I do believe that's a great transition to talk about what exactly has happened in Philly, because looking at the decisions that have been made with that front office over the past couple of months, it is very clear that this year could potentially be the last season that we see of the quote-unquote process. After deliberately losing and tanking for 4 straight years, as well as a few underwhelming seasons since we have seen both Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid participate with one another on the court, it is clear that the Sixers need some type of direction, and it is uncertain to what exactly is holding them back from that. Because of this, Philly has made some drastic changes to their organization, and it isn't just with the personnel. They brought in Daryl Morey from Houston to fill in an executive role position in their front office. They also decided to part ways with Brett Brown as a head coach and bring in Doc Rivers, and they also decided to revamp their roster, even though you can make an argument that talent-wise they may have gotten worse by departing from both Al Horford and Josh Richardson. Bringing in both Danny Green and Seth Curry into the starting lineup gives them a defined offensive system that will clearly center around Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid receiving the most spacing that they probably have ever seen since the earlier years of them being together. And because of this, all of the variables that could have swayed anyone away from coming to the inevitable conclusion that these two stars cannot coexist with one another no longer exists with this team. And so if the Philadelphia 76ers cannot meet expectations, which in my opinion should be a 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference and really competing for a conference finals appearance, I do believe that the Sixers will see a drastic change in the near future with parting ways with either Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons. Up next, we have a team that could potentially keep the Philadelphia 76ers from meeting those expectations, and that team are the Milwaukee Bucks, who are in a situation where more or less this upcoming year is a championship or bust season. Milwaukee, unlike prior years in franchise history, have found themselves in a situation where they are one of the more relevant teams in the NBA. A huge reason for this has to do with their franchise player in Giannis Antetokounmpo, but that level of relevancy could evaporate by the end of the year, depending on where the Bucks finish off in the postseason. And the reason for this is because Giannis is on the last year of his contract. To address this potential problem, the Milwaukee Bucks have decided to make some changes to their roster. The most noteworthy one is replacing Eric Bledsoe with Jrue Holiday, who should be able to duplicate the defensive productivity from Bledsoe while being a noticeable improvement on the offensive end. The Bucks also attempted to add even more firepower to their offense this offseason by going after Bogdanovic, but unfortunately that acquisition fell through. And allegedly due to the failed acquisition, there are some reservations from Giannis to sign a massive extension to the Bucks. But in my opinion, that isn't the biggest headline heading into this upcoming year in Milwaukee. Through my lens, what's much more important is the development of Giannis and what we can expect from him entering this upcoming year. Because up until this point, Giannis has had a very unconventional path to stardom. Due to this, placing expectations on Giannis has been fairly difficult within the past several years. However, this year is a bit different. Giannis is coming off of a season in which he not only won League MVP for the second consecutive season, but also won Defensive Player of the Year. He also led the Milwaukee Bucks to not only the best record in the NBA, but one of the best regular seasons in franchise history. But unfortunately, the result in last year was an underwhelming performance from Giannis in the playoffs that concluded with a second round exit. And now that we're at a point where we all just expect Giannis to be an MVP candidate on a year-to-year basis, lead his team to one of the best records in the NBA, and have a phenomenal statistical year during the regular season, the next step in stardom, especially when it comes to putting your name amongst other all-time greats, is producing in the playoffs. And I do believe pushing for a championship or at bare minimum a finals appearance should not only be mandatory for the Milwaukee Bucks, but also a mandatory goal that should be set on Giannis as well. Then on the other side of the bracket, we have the Los Angeles Clippers, and after a very disappointing season, a lot was revealed about this organization. First, after blowing a 3-1 lead and failing to make the conference finals yet again in franchise history, obviously someone had to be the scapegoat. This year it was head coach Doc Rivers, and the Los Angeles Clippers decided to move in a different direction with the head coaching position while promoting Tyronn Lue. Now, after that news broke, there have been several stories that have been released claiming that both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard received preferential treatment from the front office, which normally is pretty common in the NBA. However, the preferential treatment was pretty extensive to the point where Kawhi would make various demands, and also it was deemed acceptable for him to show up late to either practices or even to some games. Because of the preferential treatment, it was alluded that it was really hard for these star players to build some chemistry with some of their supporting cast pieces. And speaking of which, one of the more productive supporting cast members for the Clippers in Montrezl Harrell, who won Sixth Man of the Year last season, made his way to the rival team with the Los Angeles Lakers in free agency. And if that wasn't enough, recently Paul George in an interview where he outright stated that Doc Rivers did not use him correctly, and further alluded that Doc Rivers did not make the proper adjustments for them to win the Denver Nuggets series. So yeah, that is a lot. And if you pair that with us understanding that the Lakers just got better this offseason, the Denver Nuggets more than likely will get better due to the experience that they have with one another, and even the Dallas Mavericks had made some adjustments to their roster that personally I am favorable of. Honestly, it will be very interesting to see what the Clippers will accomplish this upcoming season, because at this point, if last year wasn't a championship or bust season, it definitely feels like this year is. And then finally, we actually have legitimate battles for the 7th and 8th seed in both conferences. Now, normally this would not really matter. However, after last year's massive success with the play-in tournament, the NBA is going to duplicate that and bring it into the upcoming year. And I honestly believe it could turn out to be some of the most entertaining basketball we may witness all throughout the year. In the Eastern Conference, both the Washington Wizards and the Atlanta Hawks have made major adjustments to their roster. And of course, the end result should be making the playoffs. And then in the Western Conference, it could be even better because you do have 10 teams who can make an argument to why they should expect to be in the playoffs. Teams such as the Memphis Grizzlies, the Phoenix Suns, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Golden State Warriors. It's very clear the race for the 7th, 8th, and possibly even the 6th seed will be highly entertaining, and I can't wait to see what happens towards the end of the season, and of course, what's going to happen in the play-in tournament. But with that being said, people, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Also, to the people out there who are still watching this video and rocking with me strong, make sure you click the links in the description. Not only do I have a second channel where I will be doing more basketball related videos, but also I have another channel with a good friend of mine where we do reactions called Agent Zero, so make sure you go check that out as well. And until next time, I will see you all later. Peace.